So my second pregnancy ended up being a chemical pregnancy. So a chemical pregnancy essentially is a very early miscarriage where you have a positive pregnancy result and then the pregnancy shortly ends afterwards. And for me, I went on to go have a sort of heavy period shortly after the positive pregnancy result. I do feel that chemical pregnancy is downplayed because it happened so early on. I personally had four miscarriages, and I was absolutely heartbroken and devastated with the chemical pregnancy, even though it was still so early on. There's still a lot of grieving to be done. I was grieving the fact that it was a loss of a pregnancy that I really wanted, and I really wanted to be successful. I think I was also grieving the fact that I felt, because I'd had a loss before, that I was never going to have a normal pregnancy. I was never going to have a pregnancy where I was, excited by getting those double lines on the pregnancy test result. I knew that was always going to be overshadowed by sort of fear and worry of what could happen. I think I also had the realization that we were going to have to go back to sort of trying again, which I found, to be really difficult and all consuming at time, like going back and tracking when you're ovulating. That was sort of, hard to come to terms with. We would have to go back and start sort of doing that again. But just in terms of sort of how I found out about sort of the pregnancy, and the story there was, we were actually away on holiday when we found out, and I initially sort of thought that I was coming on my period because I had some spotting round about the time when I should have been coming on. It was a little bit early, and I remember just being really upset because every time I would come on my period, because we were trying, I would always get a bit sort of teary and sad. So I thought that I was going to be coming on my period, and it never came. So I think a few days sort of later, when I should have been sort of technically late for my period, we did a pregnancy test, and when we did the test, there was a faint line sort of there. We did multiple tests, and a faint line kept appearing. When I had my sort of ectopic pregnancy previously, the line was very strong. It was a very kind of strong line that I had there. So I think I decided to do a pregnancy test a few days later just to kind of make sure. And the line was getting darker, but it still wasn't. I felt sort of a full line there. Then when we came back from our holiday, I experienced sort of light bleeding and spotting. Because I'd had a previous ectopic, I was a ball of anxiety around this. My first sort of thought was, am I having another ectopic? Am I in sort of danger here? So I rang the hospital, and I was advised to go to A&E, which I did. So I sort of waited 6 hours there. I wasn't taking any chances. I wanted to be sort of seen. And that's when they um, looked at me for a scan. And it was very early stages at this point. I think it was sort of around the 5 weeks sort of mark. So they couldn't really see anything. But I remember they couldn't really see a sac. And I remember at that point, I just couldn't see anything. So it was not looking promising, but they wanted to do my bloods, so have a couple of different blood tests done 48 hours apart from each other, and essentially that was to track my HCG levels, which is the pregnancy hormones, which should be doubling at early pregnancy. So I went in for the blood tests, and then found out that my HGC levels were declining, which was showing that the pregnancy was failing. And me and my husband were absolutely, heartbroken. It just felt like, another blow, especially because we'd had a loss sort of previously. But it really, really, really did knock us hard. I did go back to work sort of straight away. Whether that was the right thing to do, I don't know. Because of my sort of previous loss, and that was quite traumatic, I had quite a lot of counselling, so I'd spent a lot of time and energy on healing, which I did find to be really, really helpful. But I found with this time, I just wanted to move on, especially because I knew that we wanted to try again at some point in the future. I just didn't really want to look back, and I just wanted to sort of distract myself and just really forget sort of the the hardship and sort of the sadness sort of around this. So I did find that I just threw myself back into work. I did eventually tell sort of friends and family, but I didn't let sort of work know, and I used that as a bit of well, definitely a distraction. What I did find is that I just found it so hard to be around pregnant women or just see pregnant women. I found it so triggering, and I just found that everybody, it felt like this, everyone around us was becoming pregnant. People at work, family members, our friendship group, it just felt like every single week we were getting another pregnancy announcement, and it just felt absolutely brutal and another blow every single time, sort of hearing about these stories of other people. And I remember it would just absolutely floor me hearing these announcements. It was really, really kind of crippling. But in terms of sort of signs that I had of it being a chemical pregnancy, I had bleeding at the start. As I said, I thought I was coming on my period, and then I had sort of light spotting afterwards, and it was sort of dark in sort of colour there. And then I also I didn't feel pregnant because I'd had a previous ectopic pregnancy. I felt pregnant there. It was strange. Like I felt like I had this rush of hormones. I felt sort of, I, I, yeah, I felt, I didn't have any of that. I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel any of the sickness. It was so strange. I just didn't feel pregnant as well. So they were a few sort of signs that I had that it was a chemical pregnancy. But with the bleeding and things like that, I didn't have any pain or anything. It was just light bleeding and spotting. And then I think it was probably about a week after I had the results from the blood test to show that the pregnancy failing. That's when I came on to have a sort of heavier period, which was, as I said, heavier than normal, but I wasn't in sort of too much pain there, thankfully. In terms of sort of what helped me, I found with this time, I didn't actually want to talk to people about it. I talked to people previously in my first loss, and as I said, like counselling I found to be super helpful. But this time I just wanted to sort of distract myself and try and get back into sort of the rhythm of things. But I still wasn't feeling okay, even though I was trying to distract myself. I still knew that I was not feeling myself. But what I did find that really helped was just journaling and writing stuff down, which is not something that I normally do. So I would just write down what I was feeling, what my emotions were, because I just found it to be so complex at times. Like I was having so many different emotions that I couldn't really articulate in my head. and they were so overwhelming at times. I just felt like getting it out of my head and putting it onto a piece of paper, just I found to be really therapeutic, because I was sort of having some really conflicting emotions at times. I think I wrote down that I felt grief, I felt guilt, I felt jealousy around all these pregnancy announcements, but then there would be, happiness because I wanted this for my friends, but then I would also feel, yeah, a lot of guilt around that. And then there was also, feelings of just pure demotivation and feeling deflated, angry, which I've never really sort of had that extreme sort of angriness before. And so it was just really, really helpful to just get it out my head and get it on a bit of sort of paper, which I really found to sort of help. So hopefully sort of this story and these kind of tips might sort of resonate with anyone else kind of out there going through this.